I was having coffee with an old friend last week, a senior structural engineer who spent 30 years making sure the planes we fly in don't fall out of the sky. He's the kind of guy who speaks in tolerances and stress loads, rational, precise, and almost unnervingly calm. But as we sat there, he pushed a printed document across the table. I expected to see blueprints for a new fuselage. Instead, it was a 74-page legal opinion from the Texas Attorney General. He looked at it with a sort of exhausted detachment. "I'm retiring early," he told me. This man lives for his work. When I asked why, he didn't point to declining health or a better offer. He pointed to a memo from his HR department sitting right next to the AG's report. It was a diversity and equity impact assessment he was required to sign off on before clearing a new set of safety protocols. He told me about a recent hiring round where a top-tier candidate, a person who could calculate wing flutter in their sleep, was passed over because their diversity statement lacked the right ideological buzzwords. The person they hired instead seemed more focused on managing social friction in the break room than checking the bolts on the assembly line. "It's a virus," my friend said, his voice dropping. "It starts in the administrative offices, but eventually it reaches the metal." To him, the Texas AG's opinion wasn't just a political firebrand. It was a clinical biopsy of a dying system. He saw it as a desperate attempt to stop what he called the tyranny of mediocrity before the systemic blood debt came due. That shift in him, from a man who trusted the objective logic of the machine to someone who felt the foundational code of his entire industry was being rewritten by unaccountable bureaucrats, was chilling. It left me wondering, are we witnessing a final successful defense of merit, or are we simply reading the autopsy report of a systemic collapse?
Wow, that line. It reaches the metal. I think that's going to stick with me.
Powerful, isn't it?
It completely shattered that comfortable illusion we have. You know, the idea that the culture war, or whatever you want to call it, is something that happens over there.
But it's on Twitter, it's in a university seminar room.
Exactly. It's abstract, it's ideological, but the physical world, the planes, the bridges, the power grid, that stuff just keeps working. It's immune because, well, physics is physics.
But his point is that it's not immune. The people who maintain that physical world are being infected by the ideology. And eventually, the ideology breaks the machine.
We're looking at this document, this Texas Attorney General opinion, KP 0505.
And it is not a light read. I mean, for a legal opinion, it's surprisingly passionate. It's dense. Frankly, it's angry.
It's a declaration of war, in a way. Not on people, but on an entire worldview. This isn't just about a specific Texas law. It's a head-on collision between two fundamentally different ways of running a society.
Two operating systems.
On one side, you have what the AG calls constitutional colorblindness. Right. The law doesn't see race. It sees individuals. Merit is objective. Competence is what matters. On the other, you have what's generally called the identity-based equity framework. And this framework argues the exact opposite. It says, because of history, because of systemic injustice, you must see race too.
You have to manage the outcomes to make sure they're fair.
And to do that, you need a whole class of managers, a bureaucracy, to constantly adjust the dials and enforce that balance.
So what the Texas AG is doing here is taking a sledgehammer to that entire bureaucratic structure. He's saying that, in Texas at least, the whole DEI framework in government and schools is illegal, unconstitutional.
Which is a huge deal.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about undoing decades of policy and institutional habit. It's an attempt to pull the emergency brake on a train that's been accelerating for a long, long time.
So for this deep dive, we're looking at this from a few different angles. Obviously, there's the AG opinion itself, the 74 pages of legal argument.
Right, we'll get into the weeds on that. But we also have to look at the context. Why? Why did your friend, the engineer, feel this way? Is there evidence that this virus has, in fact, reached the metal?
So we've got federal safety reports from the FAA on Boeing.
We've also got academic research on the explosion of administrative staff in universities, where this ideology really gets incubated. And we have some counter-arguments, too, research on why these diversity initiatives were started in the first place.
It's not a simple picture.
Oh, but let's start where the stakes are highest. Let's start with aerospace. Because, you know, if a university holds a bad seminar, some people get bored.
But if an airplane has a bad bolt, a lot of people have a very bad day.
The margin for error is zero. Physics doesn't grade on a curve. It doesn't care about your good intentions.
And that brings me to the story I came across. It's an account from a guy named Elias. And it's just perfectly illustrates this tension. He was a senior propulsion lead at a major firm near Fort Worth.
So, right in the heart of it.
Absolutely. And I want to read this because it feels so visceral. He says, try to imagine a man who has spent 30 years obsessed with the margin of error, someone who believes that physics doesn't care about your intentions, only your math. In early 2026, Elias sat through a hiring committee meeting where the top-ranked candidate, a kid with a brilliant thesis on fluid dynamics, was passed over for a strategic hire who met the new institutional diversity metrics but struggled with basic stress testing simulations. Elias didn't argue. He had seen the administrative viruses spread through the HR department for years. Instead, he watched as the team's internal culture shifted from, is it safe, to, is it compliant? A few months later, during a routine static fire test, a valve failed because of a calculation error that should have been caught in peer review. No one was hurt, but Elias looked at the charred components and realized the silence in the room wasn't just shock, it was the quiet realization that competence had become secondary to ideology. He resigned that week to join a small, underground, merit-first startup.
The silence in that room, that's the part that's so chilling. It's not the explosion is just a symptom. The disease is the silence. It's the fact that everyone in that room knew why the valve failed. They knew the new hire wasn't up to snuff. They knew the calculation error was a direct result of prioritizing compliance over competence.
But no one could say it.
No one could say it. Because in the new culture, if you point out that the strategic hire can't do the math, what are you? You're a bigot. You're intolerant. You're creating a hostile work environment.
You're not a team player.
Exactly. The entire safety mechanism of a high-stakes engineering team, which is brutal honesty and peer review, is completely neutered by HR ideology.
It's like the emperor's new clothes, but if you're the one who points out he's naked, a panel blows off the fuselage at 30,000 feet.
And this isn't just an anecdote. I mean, the Elias story is powerful, but it's backed up by the data. We have this FAA-commissioned report on Boeing's safety culture. This is a federal investigation.
And what did it find?
It found, and this is a direct quote, a massive disconnect between the senior management and the actual engineering employees. It's like they're living in two different realities.
What does that disconnect look like on the ground on the factory floor?
It looks like the C-suite is obsessed with one set of metrics and the engineers are obsessed with another. Leadership is talking about start price, quarterly earnings, and increasingly ESG scores. Environmental governance. They're tracking their diversity numbers, their carbon footprint, their social impact statements.
All the stuff that looks good in an annual report.
All the stuff that gets you a good score from BlackRock. Meanwhile, the engineers on the floor are talking about, metal fatigue, hydraulic pressure, software integration, the actual physics of keeping the plane in the sky.
And the two sides aren't communicating.
The report found that engineers felt their safety concerns were just noise. They weren't taken seriously by management unless it was something that would immediately impact the production schedule or the budget. Safety was becoming a secondary concern to compliance and finance.
And there was an element of fear too, right? The report mentions retaliation.
Yes, explicitly. Engineers were worried that if they were the one to raise a red flag, if they were the squeaky wheel that caused a delay, it would go on their permanent record. It would tank their performance review.
And performance reviews aren't just about a Christmas bonus anymore.
Not in these big corporations. Your performance review determines your salary, sure, but it also determines your ranking. And when the next round of layoffs comes, and it always comes, they look at those rankings. So you have a choice. Do I flag this potential issue with the landing gear, risk getting a bad review and being first on the chopping block?
Or do I just stay quiet, sign off on it, and hope for the best?
And you hope for the best. That's the silence Elias heard. It's the sound of thousands of individual engineers making a rational calculation to protect their careers, and in doing so, creating a systemic safety failure.
That phrase from my friend's story, medical enemy, the breakdown of the professional immune system. This sounds exactly like that.
And one of the most specific damning details in the source material is about a field called human factors engineering.
Right, that came up in the context of the 737 MAX crashes. Exactly.
It's a fascinating and absolutely critical discipline. Human factors is the science of the interface between the person and the machine. In aerospace, it's about how a pilot interacts with the cockpit. How do they react under extreme stress? Is the software intuitive, or does it fight them? Are the warning lights clear, or are they confusing?
It's the psychology of design.
The psychology of life or death design. And what the investigations found was that Boeing had been systematically deprioritizing and cutting staff in that specific area. They had fewer and fewer engineers focused on it.
But why? Of all the things to cut, That seems like the last one you'd touch.
Because it's slow, it's expensive, it requires painstaking testing and simulation, it doesn't look good on a quarterly report, and most importantly, it doesn't show up on a diversity and equity impact assessment.
So you have this bizarre inversion. The HR department is growing, hiring DEI consultants, running workshops on microaggressions.
Managing social friction, as your friend's story put it.
Right. And at the exact same time, the department responsible for making sure the pilot can actually fly the plane is being hollowed out.
It's a zero-sum game. Every dollar, every hour of executive attention spent on ideological compliance is a dollar and an hour not spent on structural integrity. And the Texas AG's opinion hammers this point home again and again.
That DEI isn't just a distraction, it's a dangerous one.
It's a misallocation of resources on a civilizational scale. The sources we looked at found one estimate that Fortune 1000 companies had pledged something like $340 billion toward racial equity commitments.
Wait, what was that number?
$340 billion, with a B.
That's it. I can't even comprehend that amount of money.
It's a staggering amount of capital. Now, just as a thought experiment, imagine if that $340 billion had been spent on, say, R&D. On new materials science, on stress testing, on human factors engineering.
We'd probably have a colony on Mars by now.
But the AG's point is more fundamental. He argues that when a company's leadership starts making decisions based on meeting racial quotas or social goals instead of making the best product, they're not just being inefficient, they are breaching their fiduciary duty.
Their legal responsibility to their shareholders.
Look, if you run an airline, your first, second, and third duty is to operate safe airplanes. If you are spending billions on social initiatives while, doors are flying off your planes in midair, you have fundamentally broken the trust that underpins your entire business.
And this all traces back to the virus entering through the administrative offices. It starts with a memo from HR, a new training module, a different set of hiring criteria, and it ends with charred components on a test stand.
That begs the question, where does this administrative class, these people driving the virus, actually come from? They don't just appear out of thin air in a corporate boardroom.
No, they have to be trained. They have to be credentialed.
They are manufactured. And the primary factory for this new managerial class is the modern university.
Which brings us to the second part of this puzzle, the story of what's happened to higher education. I saw a post from a woman, a Dr. Eris Thorne, who'd been a history professor at a major Texas university for 20 years.
So she had a front row seat.
She lived through the whole transformation. And her description of the administrative bloat wasn't about spreadsheets or org charts. She called it a suffocating fog. She said that by 2026, her own department had more diversity coordinators than it had tenured professors.
More managers than teachers.
And she tells this one story. She was trying to get funding for a graduate student's research project on the Texas Revolution, a pretty standard, important historical topic for a Texas university. She was told the money was gone. It had been diverted to pay for a mandatory university-wide equity audit. And this audit was being conducted by an outside consulting firm, and it cost 6 figures.
A 6-figure audit.
While her students were using history textbooks that were over a decade old. And the library roof was literally leaking.
The leaking roof, the outdated textbooks, while hundreds of thousands of dollars are going to an outside consultant for an equity audit. That says everything.
For the core mission education research, maintaining the actual infrastructure of learning is crumbling. But the budget for the administrative layer, the ideological enforcement layer, is booming.
It's not a funding problem. The university has money. It's a priorities problem.
No.
The money is being systematically siphoned away from the academic mission and into this parasitic bureaucracy.
So she watched her university's finances get weaker and weaker under the weight of this managerial class that, in her words, produced nothing but spreadsheets and workshops. And she said the whole culture of academic rigor was being replaced by a demand for loyalty to the narrative.
You have to toe the line.
So when the Texas AG's opinion came down, striking at the legal foundation of all these DEI programs, she said she didn't feel political glee. She just felt relief, like a fever had finally broken.
A chance to get her university back.
Exactly. A chance to return the focus to the students and the actual pursuit of knowledge instead of just feeding this self-perpetuating machine. And you look at this and, I think you can understand the initial impulse. No one wants to leave students behind. You want to make sure everyone feels included.
Of course. The intentions, at least at the very beginning, might have been good.
But when the management of inclusion becomes the mission itself, when it becomes bigger than the actual education, You get what she's describing. It's a classic case of institutional capture. The administrative body is taken over the host.
And we hear this term administrative bloat thrown around a lot, but the numbers are actually shocking when you look at them.
This isn't just a feeling she had. There's hard data.
We've got a report here from the National Association of Scholars that just lays it bare. Between 1987 and 2018, so a 30-year span, the number of administrators at universities grew by over 50%.
50%. And what about faculty?
That growth rate absolutely dwarfs the growth of tenure-track faculty. In many universities today, there are officially more administrators on the payroll than there are full-time teaching faculty.
So the support staff now outnumbers the actual mission-critical staff. But who are these people exactly? We're not just talking about librarians or IT guys, are we?
No, and that's a crucial distinction. Those roles support the academic mission. We're talking about a very specific new class of administrator. The report uses this amazing term for them, deanlets.
Deanlet, dismissive.
It's a bit of a pejorative, sure. It was coined by a political scientist named Benjamin Ginsberg in his book, The Fall of the Faculty. A deanlet is a mid-level manager, a functionary.
Like an assistant vice provost for student engagement.
Or a director of inclusive excellence.
Yeah.
Or a coordinator for community belonging. These are people who don't teach classes, they don't conduct research. Many of them have no academic background in the subjects the university is supposed to be teaching. Their entire career path is administration.
Okay, so if they're not teaching and they're not doing research, what is it they do all day?
They manage, they coordinate, they hold meetings, but most of all, they justify their own existence. And you have to understand the incentive structure here because it explains everything.
It's a feedback loop.
It's a self-perpetuating machine. If your job title is Assistant Dean for Bias Incident Response, you cannot go to your boss at the end of the year and say, good news, there were no bias incidents, everything is great.
Because then they don't need an assistant dean for bias incident response.
Exactly. Your job depends on the continued existence of the problem you are hired to solve. So you have to find problems. You have to lower the threshold for what constitutes a problem. You have to discover microaggressions and systemic inequities that require new mandatory workshops, new online training modules, new reporting procedures.
And more staff.
And more staff to manage all the new initiatives. It's a bureaucracy that is designed for infinite growth. It can never solve the problem because if it did, it would cease to exist.
And this connects to an idea from the source material called the hidden curriculum.
This is how the deanlets really exert their power. You see, the faculty people, like Dr. Thorne, they still, for the most part, control the official curriculum. The syllabus for History 101 or Physics 205.
But that's only one part of the student experience.
It's a shrinking part. The deanlets control everything else. They control student orientation before classes even start. They control the residential life in the dorms. They control the student clubs, the wellness centers, the career services.
The entire ecosystem around the classroom.
And they use that ecosystem to teach this hidden curriculum. They are indoctrinating students with a very specific ideology about power, race, gender, and justice before those students ever get to debate those ideas in a philosophy class. They're bypassing the faculty entirely.
So, in effect, the administration has built a kind of parallel university, a shadow university that operates within the shell of the old one.
And they're using the students' tuition money to pay for it. This is a huge piece of the student debt crisis that nobody wants to talk about. We keep telling 18-year-olds that they need to take out $100,000 in loans to get a good education.
But a huge slice of that $100,000 isn't going to pay for Dr. Thorne and her history books.
Not even close. It's going to pay the six-figure salary of the Associate Dean for Strategic Diversity Initiatives. It's going to pay for the consultants running the equity audit. It's funding a bloated, dysfunctional bureaucracy that many argue actually detracts from the real education.
And so the Texas AG's opinion, by making these DEI offices and their mandatory programs illegal, is essentially trying to defund that entire layer, to cut off the money supply.
It's an attempt to starve the beast. You can see why Dr. Thorne felt a sense of relief. It wasn't just an abstract political win for her. It was a chance to get back to her actual job without what she called the suffocating fog of the administration.
Which brings us to the actual legal mechanics of the opinion. Because the AG isn't just making a philosophical argument. He's using very specific, very powerful legal tools to dismantle this entire apparatus. And to see how that works, it's helpful to look at a third story, this time from the private sector.
Right, because this doesn't stop at the university gates.
Imagine a woman named Sarah. She's a small business owner in Austin, runs her own civil engineering firm. the kind of company that bids on state contracts to build roads and bridges.
So she's directly interacting with these government mandates.
Constantly. And she described how for years, she felt like she was forced to play this numbers game. She had to look at the race and gender of her potential hires and subcontractors before she looked at their professional certifications, just to make sure she was eligible for government work.
She had to meet the quotas.
She tells a story about a bridge project in 2025. She said she felt immense pressure to hire a specific subcontractor, not because they had the best safety record or the best price, but because they ticked the right demographic box for a quota system.
Fine.
She said she spent every single night of that contract absolutely terrified that some small structural flaw, something the best firm would have caught, would go unnoticed. She was losing sleep over the safety of a bridge she was building.
Because the state forced her to hire a less qualified team.
So when the AG's opinion came down in 2026 with its strong assertion of constitutional colorblindness, she said it was like a massive weight was lifted off her shoulders. She finally felt like she had a legal shield.
A shield to do what?
To say simply, I am hiring the best engineer for the job, period, regardless of their background. For her, it wasn't about wanting to exclude anyone. It was about the moral clarity of being able to stand by her work.
The integrity of the bridge.
She could finally look her clients in the eye and promise them without reservation that their bridge was built by the most capable hands available, not just the most statistically compliant ones. Now, this story is a lightning rod. To a lot of people, that phrase, colorblindness, sounds like willfully ignoring history, ignoring the real barriers people face.
It can sound like an excuse to maintain the status quo.
But when you hear Sarah's perspective, you realize that on the ground, in the world of concrete and steel, people are just desperate for a return to objective standards, where the only thing that matters is whether the bridge stands up.
And this is where the AG's legal argument gets really interesting. Her relief comes directly from his application of a legal doctrine called strict scrutiny.
Now, what does it actually mean? It sounds like it just means looking at something really hard.
It's so much more than that. You could say it's the most powerful weapon in constitutional law. For most laws the government passes, say, a new speed limit, the courts use a standard called rational basis review. They basically assume the law is legal unless it's completely insane. It's a very low bar.
The government gets the benefit of the doubt.
Always. But the moment the government starts classifying people by race or ethnicity, the entire game flips. If a law says one thing applies to black citizens and another thing applies to white citizens, the court's presumption changes. It now presumes that law is unconstitutional.
So the burden of proof is now on the government to prove it's not discriminating.
A huge burden of proof. To survive strict scrutiny, the government has to prove two things, and both are incredibly difficult. First, they have to show a compelling governmental interest.
Not just a good idea.
No, it has to be something absolutely essential, like national security or remedying specific documented past discrimination by that exact government agency. You can't just say societal discrimination in general.
Okay, so that's the first hurdle.
The second is that the policy must be narrowly tailored.
Meaning you can't use a cannon to kill a fly.
It means you have to use the absolute least restrictive, most precise tool possible to achieve your goal. If there is any other way to solve the problem that doesn't involve sorting people by race, you're constitutionally required to use that other way first.
So the AG looked at all these DEI programs, the hiring goals, the contracting preferences for people like Sarah, and said what?
He said they fail the test. He argues that things like diversity for diversity's sake are not a compelling interest. And these broad racial categories are definitely not narrowly tailored. They're clumsy, sweeping social engineering tools. Therefore, they fail strict scrutiny. Therefore, they are unconstitutional.
One of the boldest moves in the opinion, I thought, was his decision to explicitly overrule a previous AG opinion from 1999.
From John Cornyn, who's now a U.S. senator.
And back then, Cornyn basically gave a thumbs up to these kinds of programs. He said it was a gray area.
The 1999 opinion was very cautious. It basically said, well, the Supreme Court hasn't been perfectly clear, and diversity seems like a nice goal, so we'll let the universities and agencies have some leeway.
That the current AG, Paxton, is saying that was a catastrophic mistake.
He's saying Cornyn muddied the waters, that he created this legal ambiguity, this gray area that allowed the entire DEI bureaucracy to flourish for 25 years. By officially overruling that old opinion, he's yanking away the legal foundation that these institutions have been standing on for a generation.
Let's talk about the specific programs, like the ones that affected Sarah. The opinion goes after these hub and DBE programs, historically underutilized businesses.
Right. And these programs are built around goals. The state will say, for this billion-dollar highway project, our goal is that 21% of the contract value goes to minority-owned businesses.
And the AG's argument is that a goal is just a prettier word for a quota.
It's the duck test. If it looks like a quota, swims like a quota, and quacks like a quota, then it's probably a quota. He points to the enforcement mechanism. If a prime contractor like Sarah's company fails to meet the 21% goal, they are subjected to a painful, expensive, bureaucratic audit to prove they made a good faith effort to find minority subcontractors.
Which no business owner ever wants to go through.
To avoid the pain of the audit, they just make sure they hit the 21% number. They'll hire a less qualified or more expensive subcontractor just to make the number go away. And at that point, the goal has effectively become a hard, mandatory quota.
The opinion also has this really interesting logical attack on the whole idea of who gets to be classified as disadvantaged. He goes after the presumption part of the law.
This, to me, is one of the most powerful arguments in the whole document. Under the current federal and state rules, if you belong to certain designated groups, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Pacific Americans, and so on, you are legally presumed to be socially and economically disadvantaged.
It's automatic.
You don't have to prove anything. You could be a millionaire whose parents were both surgeons. If you're in one of those groups, the government presumes you're disadvantaged and you get the preference.
But what if you're, say, a poor white person from Appalachia?
You are presumed to be privileged. You get nothing. The only way you can qualify is to go through a long, arduous individual process to prove to the government that you have personally suffered from specific, identifiable discrimination.
The system is literally rigged by race.
The AG argues it's a clear violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. How is it logical or fair that a third-generation, Harvard-educated person from a listed group is presumed disadvantaged, while a first-generation college student from a poor, rural white family is presumed advantaged? It makes no sense.
And the list of who counts as disadvantaged is enormous. I was looking at what he called the global population critique.
The official definition of Asian Pacific American in the Texas statute includes people whose origins are in Japan, China, Vietnam, Korea, Samoa, Guam, Sri Lanka, Tonga, the Maldives. I mean, it's basically half the world's population.
So he asks this very pointed question.
He does. How exactly does giving a state contract preference to a recent wealthy immigrant from, say, Sri Lanka remedy the specific history of discrimination against Black people in the East Texas construction industry?
It doesn't. There's no connection.
There's no connection. It's not narrowly tailored. It's just this giant, clumsy demographic bucket that's completely detached from the historical justification for the programs in the first place.
There's one last legal tool he uses that I want to ask about, mostly because it has a fantastic name. The unintelligibility canon.
It sounds like something from Harry Potter, doesn't it? Yes. But it's actually a very practical tool for dealing with sloppy lawmaking. The AG found this perfect example in the Texas Code that governs appointments to state boards and commissions. One section of the law says the governor must make appointments without regard to race, creed, or sex.
Okay, the classic colorblind language.
But then, in the very next subsection, the law says the governor shall attempt to appoint members of different racial and ethnic groups.
So the law says ignore race.
Yeah.
And pay close attention to race in back-to-back sentences.
It's a direct, irreconcilable contradiction. You literally cannot obey both commands at the same time. It is unintelligible. So the AG applies the unintelligibility canon, which is a legal principle that says when a law is so contradictory that an ordinary person can't figure out what it means, the court has to strike down the confusing part.
But which part does he strike down?
He uses the Constitution as a tiebreaker. He says the colorblind mandate, without regard to race, is consistent with the Equal Protection Clause. The race-conscious mandate, appoint different racial groups, is not. So he voids the unconstitutional part and leaves the constitutional part standing. It's like legal surgery.
He's methodically going through the entire legal code of the state, finding these contradictions, finding these hidden quotas, and just excising them one by one.
It's a systematic dismantling of the entire legal framework of DEI.
Okay, I want to pump the brakes here for a second and play devil's advocate. We've spent a lot of time on the critique of DEI, but these programs didn't just materialize out of thin air. There were and are very real barriers for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And if we don't acknowledge that, we're only telling half the story.
We looked at a dissertation from Walden University that was all about the retention of women in the aerospace industry. And it paints a much more complicated picture than just quotas are bad, merit is good.
It focuses on this really important phenomenon called the glass cliff.
The glass cliff. I've heard of the glass ceiling. Is this related?
It's the much darker sequel to the glass ceiling. The glass ceiling is the invisible barrier that stops women and minorities from getting the top job in the first place.
Right.
The glass cliff is what happens when they do get the top job, but only because the company is already in a massive crisis and the probability of failure is sky high.
So they're promoted to CEO of a company that's about to go bankrupt.
Or they're made the lead engineer on a project that's hopelessly behind schedule and over budget. They're being set up to fail. They're handed the controls of the plane just as the engines are catching fire.
And then when the inevitable crash happens, the critics can say, see, we tried a diversity hire and it didn't work out.
It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And what this Walden research suggests is that the real problem with retention isn't a lack of talent or a lack of merit. It's a lack of something they call sponsorship.
How is that different from just mentorship?
Mentorship is passive. A mentor gives you advice. They tell you how to navigate office politics. Here's how you should phrase that email.
Okay.
Sponsorship is active. A sponsor uses their own political capital to advocate for you behind closed doors. A sponsor is the senior vice president who, in a meeting you're not in, says, I vouch for her. She's ready. Give her the project.
They put their own reputation on the line for you.
Good. And what the research shows is that men in these traditional industries often get this sponsorship organically through the so-called old boys network. Women and minorities often don't have access to that, so they never get the key assignments that lead to promotion.
So if we put these two ideas together, the AG is arguing that quotas are illegal and counterproductive because they force companies to hire based on numbers, not talent.
Which can lead to the Elias situation, where an underqualified person is put in a critical role.
But the Walden research suggests that simply getting rid of the quotas doesn't solve the underlying problem, which is the lack of sponsorship that prevents qualified women and minorities from ever getting a fair shot in the first place.
That's the nuance right there. The AG's opinion is a legal tool. It can clear away the unconstitutional mandates. It can stop the government from forcing Sarah to hire by the numbers, but it can't legislate culture. It can't create sponsorship.
So the real sustainable solution isn't about forced diversity, but about building a culture of genuine trust and transparent promotion paths for everyone.
That's what the research points to. Things like transformational leadership, where leaders actively invest in and sponsor talent from all backgrounds. But that's a much harder, slower process than just issuing a hiring quota.
And while this is all playing out in Texas, the ground is shifting at the federal level too. This isn't just a state-level phenomenon.
There appears to be a coordinated push. We've got executive orders from the Trump administration issued in January of 2025 that are almost a perfect mirror of the Texas AG's opinion.
The big one was titled, Keeping Americans Safe in Aviation.
Not a very subtle title. It's a direct shot across the bow, and it orders an immediate and total return to merit-based hiring at the FAA and the Department of Transportation. All DEI initiatives are to be rescinded.
But it's not just about future hires, right? There's a clause in there that's much more aggressive.
The review clause. That's the part that is probably causing panic attacks all over Washington, D.C. The order directs the FAA administrator to conduct a full performance review of every single person in a critical safety position who was hired in the previous 4 years.
So they're going back in time.
They're doing a retrospective audit of competence. The order basically says, we operate under the assumption that hiring standards were compromised by ideology during that period. Now, you must go back and ask a simple question for each of those hires. Can this person actually do the job to the highest standard?
And if the answer is no,
they are to be reassigned or removed. It's a purge. Let's not mince words. It's an attempt to systematically remove anyone from a safety-critical role who they believe was hired for reasons other than pure merit.
that is a massive reversal of bureaucratic momentum. And for private companies, the AG's opinion had a very specific warning that reaches back even further than DEI. all the way back to the Civil War era, Section 1981.
Yes, the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This is a fascinating legal turn. That law was passed right after the Civil War to guarantee that newly freed slaves had the same right to make and enforce contracts as is enjoyed by white citizens.
It was designed to protect Black Americans from discrimination.
Exactly. But the wording is key. It protects the right of all citizens to have the same contracting rights as white citizens. And now conservative legal groups are using that exact law to sue companies that run programs exclusively for minorities.
This is the Fearless Fund case.
That's the big precedent. The Fearless Fund is a venture capital firm that was running a grant contest open only to businesses owned by Black women. A legal group sued them, arguing that by excluding non-Black women and men of all races, they were violating Section 1981.
Agreed.
The court issued an injunction saying it was likely unconstitutional racial discrimination. And the Texas AG is now holding that case up as a warning to every CEO in the state. He's saying if you have a special internship or a grant or a supplier program that is open only to one race, you are breaking federal law. You are exposed, you can be sued.
And it's not just about discrimination lawsuits. He also warns them about fiduciary duty.
This is the warning to the investment world, to the pension funds, the university endowments. If you are an investment manager, your primary solemn legal duty is to maximize the financial return for your clients. If you start making investment decisions based on other criteria like a company's DEI score or their carbon footprint, and that decision leads to lower returns,
the people whose money you're managing can sue you for malpractice.
they can sue you for breaching your fiduciary duty. The legal landscape is completely flipping. For the last decade, companies saw DEI as a form of legal and PR insurance. It was a shield that protected them from activist pressure.
And now the AG is saying that shield is actually a target, that these policies don't protect you from liability, they create it.
That's the sea change.
We've covered an immense amount of ground, from the quiet dread in Elias's engineering lab to the bureaucratic noise of the deanlets in Dr. Thorne's university, all the way to this very precise, almost surgical legal dismantling by the Attorney General.
And it all seems to circle back to that one core conflict. What is the fundamental operating system of our society? Is it a system based on objective, measurable reality? Does the math work? Does the bridge stand? Does the plane fly?
Or is it a system based on the subjective management of group identities and the constant rebalancing of historical grievances?
My friend, the engineer, his phrase for it was the systemic blood debt.
I can't get that out of my head. The idea that for years we've been making withdrawals from an account we didn't even know existed, borrowing against the accumulated competence and safety of previous generations to pay for our current ideological projects.
The systemic blood debt, the interest payments on that debt are things like failing infrastructure, falling airplane parts, and erosion of public trust in our core institutions.
But there is a sort of hopeful undercurrent in some of this idea of the civilizational night watchman or the remnant.
Right. This is the response to the institutional capture. The competent people, the ones like Elias who believe in objective standards, they don't just give up and go home. They leave. They exit the corrupted legacy institutions.
He left to join a small, merit-first startup.
They're building parallel structures, new companies, new organizations, maybe even new universities that are explicitly founded on the old codes of excellence and merit. It's a quiet exodus of talent.
It feels like an attempted transfer of power. For decades, we watched as power flowed from elected officials and accountable leaders to this unelected, unaccountable managerial class. The HR departments, the DEI consultants, the university deanlets.
And legal opinions like KP 0505 are an attempt by the official elected system to claw some of that power back. Right, the real lasting change might be coming from the bottom up, from the people who are just quietly walking away and refusing to play the game anymore.
Because at the end of the day, there are certain non-negotiable realities.
You can't argue with gravity. It is the ultimate impartial judge of our work. And it doesn't care one bit about our diversity statements.
The Texas opinion acts as a firebreak. But the question remains whether the primary institutions, universities, aerospace giants, government agencies, are too deep in their ideological course to reverse. The response from the competent and the rational seems to be a passive exile, a movement to build something new outside the legacy systems. We are left with a stark reality. The choice is no longer between progressive or conservative management of the status quo, but between a managed decline within the old structures and the deliberate, difficult work of laying completely new foundations based on the ruthless, objective reality that facts do not care about feelings.